They threw me into that ring, broken, mocked, and expected to fail. The crowd came to watch a slaughter. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't trained. But what happened next was something no one expected. Here's how I that nobody were believed became the last thing he feared. They said anyone could try. Anyone. All you had to do was sign your name and step into the ring. They didn't mention the rest. They didn't mention the laughing. They didn't mention the cameras. They didn't mention how cold the cement felt underneath my shoes, or how heavy your lungs get when every person in a crowd wants to see you fail. Or worse, wants to laugh while you do it. It wasn't supposed to be me out there. I was just the cleaner. The one who kept the floors mopped and the mirrors spotless in the dojo where they trained. Every evening I watched them move like fire and fluid, every punch sharp like lightning, and every kick precise as a surgeon's blade. I wasn't supposed to be part of their world. I was the one who folded their towels. And when they noticed me at all, it was only to tell me where I'd missed a spot. But sometimes, when the last student left and the door clicked shut, I'd stand in the back corner and mimic what I saw. Just the movements. Quiet, hesitant. A step here, a twist there. Nothing fancy. But I felt something then, like my body was trying to remember something it never knew. But then I saw the banner. Big red letters printed on cheap vinyl, flapping just outside the gate. Knock down the master. Win $10,000. At first I laughed. Not out loud, of course. Just one of those soft, hopeless little huffs that don't make it past your throat. $10,000. That wasn't a prize. That was a miracle. That was surgery for my mother. That was a month of rent. That was breathing room. That was enough to keep the lights on, to get off the floor, and maybe even back to something that felt like life again. I watched from behind the gate for hours before I stepped forward. Everyone else who lined up looked like they belonged in the ring. Wide shoulders, protein shake confidence, too much cologne, and enough testosterone to choke the sun. The crowd loved them. Even when they lost with flair. One got flipped. One got knocked out in less than 30 seconds. One cried and still got a handshake from the master. Shifu Run, they called him. The living legend. He moved like he was made of smoke and steel. There wasn't a drop of doubt in his body. Not even when he was handed his next opponent. And then came me. I didn't have a fancy walk or a tight uniform. My hoodie was too long in the sleeves, and I had a stain on the front that I couldn't scrub out. My shoes were falling apart at the seams. I'd worn them for 2 years. Same pair I wore to clean the dojo at night when the lights were down, and the air still carried the heat of the day's sweat. I stepped up to the sign-in table, and the boy there looked at me like I was trying to rob the place. You want to register? I nodded. Didn't trust my voice to come out steady if I spoke. My hand shook when I took the clipboard. It wasn't nerves. It was memory. The weight of everything I hadn't done. Everything I had let happen. And the one thing I was finally going to do. I wrote my name. Just the first letter of my last name. Didn't need to give them more than that. I wasn't here to become famous. I just needed to finish what I started. My hand hovered after the last letter. Part of me wanted to turn and run. But there was nowhere to run that would give me back what I had already lost. The announcer didn't even try to hide the sarcasm. His smile stretched too far, teeth too white to be honest. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a surprise entry. The dojo's very own cleaning crew. Give it up for Layla the Mop Queen. The laughter was a wall. It hit me hard and fast, almost as hard as what was waiting inside the ring. I wanted to look away, to fold into myself, and disappear the way I always did. But I stepped forward, one foot in front of the other. My body moved like it didn't know better, like it had finally decided it was done being small. The ring was smaller than it looked from the outside. The ropes were frayed, and the mat stank of blood and sweat. I climbed between the ropes and stood there, not knowing what to do with my hands. Shifu Ren didn't bow. He just looked at me with that quiet smirk of someone who didn't see an opponent, just a delay in his schedule. He whispered as we took our places. "You should go back to your bucket." I didn't answer. What would have been the point? There was nothing I could say that would change what was about to happen. The bell rang, and before I could even flinch, his palm was in my chest. The world spun. I didn't fall, I flew. My back hit the mat like a slap across my soul. My lungs locked. It felt like someone had stolen the air and replaced it with fire. I lay there, staring at the sky above the ring, hearing the roar of the crowd melt into a single note of humiliation. It wasn't just physical pain. It was the echo of every time life knocked me down and told me to stay there. I tasted blood. Somewhere in the distance, the announcer said something dumb and smug and full of laughter, but I didn't hear the words. I heard something else. I heard my father yelling when I was 7 years old and dropped his cigarette money on the way home. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut the day my sister left and never came back. I heard my old supervisor shouting in my face that if I was 5 minutes late again, I was done. I heard every apology I'd ever swallowed. Every insult I pretended didn't hurt. Every moment I decided to stay quiet just to keep the peace. Every scar I carried, hidden under sleeves and silence. And then I rolled. My fingers dug into the mat. My elbows buckled, then straightened. I rose to one knee. The crowd went quiet, confused. Then someone laughed again. A forced laugh, nervous, like they weren't sure what they were seeing. I stood. Not because I thought I could win. Not because I had some secret technique or hidden strength waiting to burst out. I stood because I was done staying down. I was done living at the bottom of every room. I was done being part of the floor. If they were going to break me, they'd have to do it properly. The referee looked at me like I was made of glass. The announcer stuttered into the microphone. Shifu Ren tilted his head. "You want more?" he asked. Still calm. Still condescending. But there was a hint, just the faintest flicker, of something else now. Curiosity. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The bell rang again. And this time I moved forward. I didn't charge. I didn't raise my fists like I had something to prove. I just walked toward him, steady and breathing, my heart beating louder than the noise outside the ring. Something inside me had shifted. Not in a flash of power or divine strength. It was slower than that. Heavier. Like a door unlocking from the inside. My legs still shook. My ribs screamed with every breath. But I had made a decision. And no one, not the crowd, not Shifu Ren, not the voice in my head that whispered I didn't belong, was going to pull me back from it now. The second round didn't start with a punch. It started with a chuckle. One of those low, dismissive sounds that people make when they see something small pretending to be something big. Shifu Ren didn't raise his guard. He didn't adjust his feet. He just smiled and held his hands behind his back like a man posing for a photograph instead of preparing for a fight. And the crowd? They loved it. Their laughter wrapped around the ring like a noose. I saw someone in the front row toss popcorn into the air like it was a show. A child pointed at me, eyes wide with the kind of secondhand embarrassment kids pick up from their parents. A woman shook her head and muttered something to her friend, something sharp, something cruel. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd heard them all before. From strangers. From bosses. From people I trusted. From myself. My arms trembled as I lifted them, not in defense, but in defiance. My body remembered the blow from the first round, the way it robbed me of breath and nearly convinced me I didn't belong. But some stubborn piece of me, the same piece that refused to break under every insult I'd endured, kept me upright. Shafur encircled me slowly now, taking his time. He wasn't fighting. He was entertaining. I was the joke, the warm-up act. He danced around me like I was a training dummy on a slow rotation. He reached out with a single finger and flicked my forehead. The crowd howled. I didn't flinch.
I didn't give them that.
Do you know what a stance is? He asked mockingly. I stayed quiet. There was nothing I could say that would have changed what he thought of me. My silence was my weapon now, not because it made me mysterious, but because it made me focus. I wasn't here for them. I wasn't even here for him.
I was here for the envelope.
The one the announcer had waved around before the first fight. Thick, sealed, marked with 5 digits and the dojo's red seal. I had imagined it on the counter at the hospital. I'd imagined the way my mother would look at me when she woke up in recovery, no longer groaning from pain in her sleep. I imagined what it would feel like to bring something good into this world, even if only once.
So I let him mock me.
I let him prance and spin and deliver little slaps to my arms, my shoulder, my face. None of it was enough to knock me down. That was part of the game now. He didn't want to end it quickly. He wanted to make it memorable. The bell hadn't rung yet. There was still time. Then something strange happened. As he tapped me again, this time on the cheek with the back of his hand, my body moved. Just a twitch. Nothing big. A lean away from the contact. Not planned.
Not trained.
Just a reflex. He noticed. He narrowed his eyes. Not out of fear. Not yet. But out of mild interest, like a scientist whose experiment just deviated slightly from the expected outcome. He threw a faster jab, not full strength but faster than before. And again I moved. I didn't block. I didn't counter. I just wasn't there when the strike landed. Ah, he said quietly. You're not completely asleep. He took a step back and raised his hands. The crowd caught on quickly. The game was changing. This was no longer just humiliation. It was becoming a test. He wanted to push until he found the breaking point. Maybe he thought I didn't have one. Or maybe he wanted to be the one who finally reached it. He came at me with a sweep. I jumped. Not high, not clean, but high enough to miss the worst of it. My ankles still got clipped. I stumbled but didn't fall. My left hand came up to balance me without thinking. I heard a few people in the crowd go quiet. Then I saw the first phone drop. Someone had stopped filming. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I didn't even let myself think. Because if I started thinking, I would start remembering. And if I remembered, I would start doubting. And if I doubted, he'd see it. They'd all see it. So I stayed in the moment. One breath. One heartbeat. One shaky stance. He lunged forward with more power now. A palm aimed at my shoulder to throw me down again. I ducked. My left arm grazed his forearm and slipped past. Not a block, but it broke the contact. That's when the crowd started watching. Not laughing. Not clapping. Just watching. Even the announcer hesitated. The microphone went silent for a few seconds, as if he didn't know what to say. As if he wasn't sure what story he was supposed to sell now. I kept moving. Not fast. Not gracefully. But present. Awake. Like I wasn't just waiting to lose anymore. Ren's breathing changed. Subtle, but noticeable. He wasn't tired. He was interested. Curious. He came in with a short combo. A high elbow and a low kick. It was the kind of thing that would end most amateur fights. My body jerked left, then right. My foot caught the edge of the mat and I slipped, but even as I fell, I twisted. Landed on my hip instead of my back. Rolled to my knees. Got back up. He tilted his head at me again. You're still here. I was. And I would be. Until the envelope was in my hand, or until someone dragged me out. He stopped smiling. And for the first time since I stepped into the ring, he adjusted his stance. His real stance. The crowd felt it. A low murmur rose through them, like wind stirring dry leaves. Something about the way he set his feet, the angle of his hips, the tension in his arms. It told them what I already knew. He was done playing. The round ended. The bell rang. But neither of us moved. He looked at me. I looked back. He didn't bow. I didn't either. In that moment, there was no joke. No cleaning girl. No master. Just two bodies sharing space between fists and breath. And for the first time, I knew he saw me. It didn't start with a hit. It started with breath, the kind that fills your lungs with more than just air, the kind that pulls something awake inside you that has been buried under years of humiliation, submission, and the quiet agreement to remain unseen. That breath was mine, and it was the first thing I claimed without asking anyone's permission. I could feel the rise and fall of my chest now, not as panic and not as exhaustion, but as a signal. Like a war drum in the distance, pounding out a rhythm that demanded my attention. It was strange because I hadn't suddenly become faster or stronger. Nothing had changed about the limits of my muscles or the damage already done to my ribs. But something inside me had snapped into focus, and my body, broken as it was, moved like it finally had a reason to be alive. Sherfurin didn't say a word, and he didn't have to. There was a tightness to his stance now that hadn't been there before, a certain watchfulness behind the dark eyes that had earlier dismissed me as little more than an interruption. He could sense the shift. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. He moved toward me, not with swagger, not like before, but with the kind of precision that comes from discipline. Gone were the theatrical bows, the half-hearted strikes meant to entertain the crowd. This wasn't a show anymore. He was engaging with me like a real opponent, which meant he finally understood what I had known from the moment I stood back up after the first hit. I wasn't just here to be knocked down. I was here to take something from him. He stepped left and feinted right, his foot brushing across the mat like a dancer's. I didn't flinch. He tried a low sweep, testing my reflexes, but I hopped back and regained my balance just as my heel skimmed the rope. Even though I knew the ring was small and every inch mattered, I didn't retreat any farther. I refused to give him ground. I would give him bruises, sweat, exhaustion, but not ground. There was a twitch of his brow, a moment of doubt. That was the first crack. You see, there's a thing that happens when someone who has always been ignored finally stands in the center of the room. People don't know how to look at you. They don't know whether to be afraid or ashamed or angry that you're ruining their idea of how the world is supposed to work. Sherfurin didn't want me to win. Of course not. But more than that, he didn't want me to exist as a variable. I wasn't supposed to complicate his legacy. He struck again, faster now, his fist cutting through the air with the kind of speed that could knock out a man twice my size, but I twisted just enough that he caught only fabric. My sleeve tugged, my shoulder wrenched, but I kept moving. I was a little off balance, but I didn't stumble. My back was to the crowd now, but I didn't care what they saw. Let them guess what was happening. Let them wonder how the cleaner had made it this far. He went low again, trying to knock my legs out from under me. I jumped, clumsy, too early, too high, but I landed upright. It wasn't graceful, but it was effective. My knees screamed in protest, my ribs throbbed, and my breath was a shallow tide in my chest. But I was still there. I wasn't just surviving the blows anymore. I was predicting them. Interesting, he muttered. He didn't even mean to say it out loud. And I said nothing in return, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he had once frightened me. Silence was power now. Every second I stayed silent while advancing was a second where he had to question everything he thought he knew about this fight. Then came the real test, the strike I'd been dreading. A palm straight to the chest, almost identical to the one that had leveled me in the opening round. It came fast, vicious, and with the kind of force that would have folded most people in half. I didn't dodge it. Not completely. I shifted just enough that when it landed, my torso twisted, letting the blow flow across me instead of stopping it cold. I stumbled backward. My legs gave a little, but I didn't fall. I bent, caught the ropes with my forearm, and pushed forward again. And I smiled. It was a strange moment. My lips barely moved. My cheeks burned from the strain. But it was a real smile. Not of triumph, not of arrogance, but of recognition. For the first time, I was watching him process the truth. He had hit me with something meant to end the round, and I was still standing. The murmur in the crowd was louder now, less laughter, more confusion. Some of the phones were still raised, but the expressions had changed. No one was filming a joke anymore. I stepped toward him, not to strike, not to provoke, but just to show that I still could. My arms were down, my posture loose, my breathing uneven. But I wasn't there to perform. I was there to take control. "You think pain makes you strong?" he asked, quieter now. I tilted my head just slightly. He already knew the answer. Pain doesn't make you strong, but it shows you where your strength is hiding. He came at me again, this time with a barrage of attacks, elbows cutting through the air, knees lifting like pistons, fists sharp as bone. I dodged the first, deflected the second, caught a third across the thigh that nearly buckled me. My right foot dragged, my ankle rolled, but I recovered just fast enough to duck the next swing. Then I hit him. It wasn't elegant. My arm wasn't trained for it. But my right fist drove forward and clipped the top of his chest, just below the collarbone. It wasn't enough to hurt him, not really, but it stopped him. It made him pause. And the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in something even more powerful: silence. I moved again, this time with intention. My steps were unsteady, but they had rhythm. I wasn't moving just to avoid him anymore. I was reading him. I was listening to the way his body moved before his fists followed. My thoughts, once loud and tangled, had gone quiet. All I could hear was the heartbeat of the fight, and for the first time, I wasn't trailing behind it. I was keeping pace. He attacked again, and this time I ducked clean, twisted inside the arc of his elbow, and shoved my shoulder into his ribs. It didn't knock him off balance, but it made him feel my presence. That was enough. "You're not reacting," he muttered. "You're deciding." Exactly. This was the shift. I was no longer responding. I was making choices. Every movement was deliberate. I had taken control of the space around me and, more importantly, of the story that was unfolding in front of everyone watching. When the bell rang again, I was standing tall, chest heaving, fists still raised, not from instinct, but from conviction. He stood too, shoulders tense, brow furrowed.
He didn't bow.
I didn't either, because I wasn't there to respect him. I was there to beat him. The fourth round began not with a bang or a shout, but with an almost tangible silence that settled over the arena, thick and oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation of something irreversible. As I stepped back into the center of the ring, the fire that had been smoldering inside my lungs flared up like an ancient ember rekindled by the harsh winds of adversity, while an unyielding steel forged deep within my spine straightened me against the weight of exhaustion and pain that threatened to consume me entirely. Across from me, Sherfuren mirrored my movements, but the calm he wore now was devoid of the smug arrogance that had colored his demeanor at the beginning of our fight. Instead, it was a focused, colder expression that suggested he was no longer treating this encounter as a mere spectacle for his amusement, but as a grave matter demanding his full and undivided attention. I understood the unspoken message beneath his gaze, the implicit threat carried not only by his trained fists, but by the centuries of tradition and dominance that men like him wielded like weapons, aiming to keep women like me in their rightful place, silenced and unseen. This was no longer just a contest of physical strength or technique. It was a struggle over narrative control, an attempt to rewrite the story unfolding before the eyes of every person watching, and thereby reinforce the familiar hierarchy that I had spent my entire life quietly defying. My continued presence in the ring, my refusal to collapse or cower, was a challenge to everything he and his followers believed about power, submission, and the roles we were assigned long before we were born. The opening moments of the round were marked by a cautious circling, two predators sizing each other up with measured steps and locked eyes, each acutely aware that the other had teeth and claws and the will to use them. Then, without warning, Sherfuren struck, a spinning kick that arced through the air toward my shoulder with the grace of a dancer and the force of a battering ram, followed in rapid succession by a piston-like jab aimed precisely at my ribs. I twisted my torso sharply, my body rebelling as the edge of his foot slammed into the curve of my hip, sending sharp waves of pain radiating outward and nearly buckling my knee beneath me. I wobbled precariously, the sting of the strike burning through me, but I fought the instinct to fall, grounding myself with every ounce of willpower to remain standing. Before I could regain my breath fully, his assault continued in a relentless flurry of fists, elbows, and knees. Each strike born from years of rigorous training and honed in sweat-soaked gyms, designed not just to injure, but to dominate and break the spirit of an opponent. I moved as best I could, awkwardly but purposefully, my body becoming a map of bruises and aches as the mat beneath my feet seemed to burn with every step, the ropes closing in like a cage, the heat of the room wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. Blood tasted metallic on my tongue, mingling with salt and the fierce fire of fury that fueled me to stay upright despite the overwhelming odds. My arms grew heavy and my legs trembled under the relentless strain, but beneath the physical torment, a deeper current surged through me, something ancient and indomitable that transcended adrenaline or instinct. I no longer sought to prove anything to the crowd, to my opponent, or even to myself. My only goal in those brutal moments was to survive one more hit, to cling to the fragile thread of consciousness and strength that remained within me, and if possible, to return a single blow in kind. His next attack, a devastating straight punch aimed at my jaw, came with blinding speed, but I barely managed to duck in time, the knuckles of his fist grazing the top of my ear and stirring a rush of wind through my senses. Seizing the fleeting opening, I responded with a desperate counterstrike, my fist connecting with his ribs, not with the skill of a trained fighter, but with the raw, unrefined force of someone who had been pushed to the brink and refused to back down. He stepped back, momentarily taken aback, recalculating the unexpected tenacity before him. That small crack in his composure was a signal to me that the tide of the battle was slowly turning. Around us, the murmur of the crowd faded until their voices became nothing more than a distant echo, swallowed by the pounding of my own heart and the roaring silence that engulfed the ring. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only him, me, and the fierce, unspoken war that neither of us could afford to lose. With a sudden low sweep, he attempted to take me off my feet once more. I reacted too soon, jumping awkwardly and landing harshly, my ankle twisting beneath me in a sharp, searing pain that threatened to end the fight. I collapsed onto one knee, and for a moment, darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, whispering promises of surrender and oblivion. But even in that haze, I caught a glimpse of hesitation flickering across his face, a crack in the armor of his confidence that I seized like a lifeline. Summoning every ounce of grit I possessed, I straightened my leg with agonizing effort, grinding my teeth against the surge of pain that blossomed through my body, and forced myself back to standing, not with the grace of a seasoned warrior, but with the raw power of desperation and sheer will. He did not move. Instead, he watched me with narrowed eyes and a tight jaw, his breathing steady but his demeanor betraying a cautious respect. I refused to give him time to regain his composure, lunging forward with renewed determination. My fist struck his chest squarely, not with technical precision or devastating power, but with an earnestness born from every humiliation, every scar, every moment I had been told I was less than. He stumbled backward, his balance wavering for the first time, and the look in his eyes was no longer one of disdain, but of begrudging acknowledgement. "You're relentless," he muttered, shaking his head as if trying to understand how someone like me could refuse to break. Relentless? Yes, that was exactly what I had become, fueled by a lifetime of fighting to be seen, heard, and respected. I no longer cared about the pain that racked my body or the blood that coated my skin. My vision blurred, my breaths came ragged and uneven, and every step forward felt like dragging the weight of the world behind me. Yet I stood, defying every expectation, refusing to be the woman who bowed and wilted beneath the weight of his fists. His next swing came fast and fierce, but I managed to block it, though only partially, my forearm absorbing much of the impact and blossoming with heat and sharp, white-hot pain. I welcomed it because pain was proof that I was still fighting, still present, still alive. I pressed forward relentlessly, throwing punches in quick succession. None elegant or textbook, but effective enough to force him on the defensive. Slowly but surely, I began to push him back, step by step, breath by breath, inch by inch, toward the edge of the ring. This small advance felt monumental, a victory carved from the rubble of exhaustion and doubt. For someone like me, who had spent years being pushed around and silenced, being told where to stand and when to speak, This was the first real act of defiance that felt like it belonged to me alone. He reacted out of instinct now, his movements sharp and fast, but betraying a slight miscalculation in timing. I dodged one blow and blocked another before driving my palm against his jaw with deliberate force. His head jerked to the side, and his foot faltered. That moment was the third crack in his unshakable facade, and this time, the smile that crept onto my face was not born of mere recognition, but of genuine belief. I was wearing him down. Though he was stronger, better trained, and wielded every advantage, I possessed something more enduring, an unbreakable spirit forged by suffering and perseverance. Suffering teaches endurance when strength runs dry, and endurance is the weapon that strikes deepest when all else fails. The bell rang once more, signaling the end of the round, but I did not collapse. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, sweat dripping down my face and stinging my eyes. I stood tall, though every fiber of my being screamed for rest. He stood as well, shoulders tense and brow furrowed, but there was no longer the condescension that had marked his every movement. He did not bow, and neither did I, for respect had not yet been earned. I was not here to pay homage to him, but to shatter the illusions of superiority that he clung to so desperately. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, as I faced him with bruises and broken ribs, I knew with a certainty deeper than any muscle memory or training that I was no longer the woman who had entered the ring at the start of this battle. I was something new, something forged in the fire of rejection and fueled by the unyielding will to stand. Not just for myself, but for every person who had ever been told they did not matter. The fifth round unfolded under a heavy silence that settled over the arena like a dense fog rolling in over a battlefield, thickening the air with the weight of expectation and the tension born from everything that had transpired between us up to that point. As I stepped back into the center of the ring, every muscle screamed in protest. Every bruise throbbed with vivid intensity, and each ragged breath I drew felt like it might be my last. Yet beneath the exhaustion and searing pain, an unwavering resolve surged forward, a force far greater than physical endurance alone could summon. This was the moment where everything inside me, every wound, every humiliation, every moment of doubt, condensed into a single, unrelenting will to claim victory not just over Shurfurun but over the entire lifetime of invisibility and underestimation I had carried with me like an unwanted shadow. Across from me, Shurfurun's eyes locked onto mine, their cold, calculating gaze stripped of the arrogance and condescension that had marked him at the fight's beginning. What glinted back now was something altogether different, a wary respect, tinged with frustration and unease. As if he had come to realize that the opponent before him was no longer the weak, beaten woman he had anticipated, but a formidable adversary fueled by a fire that refused to be quenched. His stance tightened, his breathing steadied. The very energy he radiated shifted from cocky certainty to focused determination. We were no longer simply sparring for show or status. We were engaged in a raw, brutal contest that tested every fiber of our being. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the round, the crowd's restless murmurs gave way to an almost reverent hush, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us like a physical force. We circled each other warily, each footstep deliberate, each movement calculated with the knowledge that the slightest misstep could tip the balance irrevocably. I felt the sharp ache of every previous blow pounding through my body, the burning in my ribs where his kicks had landed, the dull throb in my ankle from when I nearly fell, the relentless fatigue settling into my muscles. But beneath the physical pain, there was an unshakable fire burning in my gut, a fierce determination that held me upright when every instinct screamed to collapse. Sherfuren launched the first strike, a precise jab aimed to test my guard and assert control over the flow of the fight. But I had changed. I was no longer the frightened, reactive woman from the early rounds. I anticipated his movement before it fully materialized, sliding just out of reach, and in that breath's pause, I countered. My legs swept low and hard, catching him off balance and forcing him to stumble backward, a rare falter that sent a rush of adrenaline flooding through me. This small victory was a turning point, a tangible reminder that I was no longer the underdog, but a contender. I seized the moment and pressed forward, my fists raining down in a flurry of strikes that were rough and unpolished, but carried the raw power of someone fighting not only for survival but for reclamation. Each punch was fueled by years of pent-up anger, frustration, and the unyielding desire to prove that I was worthy of respect, of recognition, of victory. The sound of my gloves connecting with his body was a rhythm that echoed through the silent space between us, a declaration that I had arrived as more than just an afterthought in this fight. But Sherfuren was no easy opponent. Recovering swiftly from the sweep, he countered with a spinning back kick that crashed violently into my ribs, sending shockwaves of searing pain radiating outward and momentarily stealing my breath. I could feel the sting explode beneath my skin, threatening to buckle my knees, yet I refused to succumb. Gritting my teeth, I summoned every reserve of strength left, blocking out the pain as I lunged forward to close the distance. The two of us locked into a clinch, bodies pressed together in a fierce contest of balance and power. The world shrank until nothing remained but the heat of his breath against my skin and the pounding of my heart hammering in my chest like a war drum. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath as we grappled in the center of the ring, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I felt the weight of his years of disciplined training pressing against me, his every movement precise and measured, yet beneath his formidable exterior, I sensed the struggle of a warrior wrestling with the unexpected resilience of an opponent who refused to yield. My own breath came short and ragged, yet I clung to the well of strength born not from technique, but from survival, survival beyond the dojo walls, beyond the arena, beyond all the times I had been cast aside and told I was not enough. Finding an opening, I struck with a fierce elbow to his ribs, the sharp impact eliciting a grunt of surprise and pain that fueled my resolve. Without pause, I followed with a knee driven hard into his thigh, pushing him back and breaking the clinch. The space between us snapped taut again as I pressed my advantage, unleashing a series of strikes that forced him to retreat defensively. For the first time, I caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the slightest doubt creeping into the armor of his confidence. I feinted to the left, twisting my body in a fluid spin to land a clean, solid punch on his jaw. The force of the blow sent his head snapping back, and a roar erupted from the crowd, though I was deaf to everything except the furious pounding of my own heart and the electric surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Sherfuren staggered but recovered quickly, his eyes burning with renewed intensity as he launched a desperate barrage of strikes, each one sharper and more calculated than before, as if trying to erase the cracks I had carved in his defense. I dodged, blocked, and absorbed blows that would have crushed anyone else, countering with every ounce of strength and will I could muster. The fight had transformed into a brutal, punishing dance, a battle not just of fists and feet, but of endurance, spirit, and unbreakable determination. Minutes stretched on, the haze of sweat and pain thickening around us, yet neither of us gave ground. Then, summoning a strength I did not know I had left, I delivered a crushing blow to his midsection that forced the breath from his lungs and sent him reeling backward, shaken and vulnerable. I pressed forward relentlessly, fueled by something more than physical power, the unshakable certainty that I was rewriting the story, not just of this fight, but of who I was and what I was capable of. My punches became statements, my movements declarations that I would no longer be invisible, dismissed, or underestimated. The bell rang to signal the end of the round, but neither of us lowered our guard. We stood battered and bruised, locked in a gaze heavy with mutual recognition, the acknowledgement that this fight had become something far greater than either of us had anticipated. Though the outcome remained uncertain, one truth shone clear. I was no longer the woman who had entered the ring. Through the pain, the struggle, and the fire of combat, I had become something new, a force of nature, a beacon of resilience, and a testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit. The final round began with an almost surreal stillness that blanketed the entire arena, as if time itself had slowed down to accommodate the monumental conclusion that was about to unfold. Every eye in the crowd was locked on us, their collective breath held in quiet anticipation, sensing the profound significance that had transformed this fight from a mere contest into a testament of human will and spirit. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with the residue of everything that had come before. The punches landed, the pain endured, the doubts conquered, and yet, beneath all of that, a new energy simmered quietly within me. It was a steady, resolute fire that had been slowly building since the moment I had stepped into the ring, growing stronger with every challenge, every humiliation, every second I had refused to surrender. This was no longer just about winning a fight. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried beneath years of neglect and invisibility, a moment to stand tall and finally be seen for the strength that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed. As I faced Shifu Ren, his eyes bore into mine with a depth I had not seen before, a mixture of grudging respect, surprise, and perhaps even something bordering on admiration. The arrogance that had once been his shield was stripped away, revealing the raw focus of a warrior who had been pushed to his limits and was forced to acknowledge an unexpected equal. The crowd, usually so boisterous and loud, had fallen into a reverent hush, captivated by the unfolding drama that transcended the physicality of the fight and touched something deeper, the indomitable spirit of the underdog rising up to defy every expectation. When the bell rang to signal the start of this final round, I felt every aching muscle, every fresh and old wound, yet none of it could diminish the clarity of my purpose. Each breath I took was deliberate and measured, my body moving with a combination of practiced discipline and instinct honed by the desperation of survival. Shifu Ren wasted no time, launching a precise, rapid series of attacks designed to overwhelm and break my defenses. His fists and feet cut through the air like sharpened blades, each strike aimed at the weak spots he had identified earlier. But I was no longer the frightened, uncertain woman who had stood at the edge of defeat. I anticipated his every move, slipping past his fists and countering with strikes fueled not by perfect technique, but by the sheer force of will and the burning desire to claim my victory. I ducked beneath a spinning kick that whistled just above my head, then countered with a powerful palm strike to his chest that forced him backward several steps. The impact reverberated through my arm, but the electricity of that moment, a surge of triumph and renewed strength, pushed me forward. Each blow I delivered was a statement, a declaration that I was here not just to fight, but to conquer the invisible chains that had bound me for so long. Time seemed to slow as the round progressed, sweat and blood mingling and dripping down our bodies, the taste of iron sharp on my tongue. My muscles screamed in protest, the pain threatening to overwhelm me, but I pushed past it, focusing instead on the rhythm of the fight. The ebb and flow of offense and defense, the silent communication of two warriors locked in battle. Then, in a moment of fleeting opportunity, a small opening appeared in Shifu Ren's guard, a subtle hesitation in his movement that spoke volumes. With every ounce of strength and precision I could muster, I delivered a crushing right hook to his jaw, connecting with a force that sent him staggering. The crowd erupted in astonished cheers, their disbelief giving way to an overwhelming surge of admiration and respect for the woman who had refused to be written off. But my attention was locked on Shifu Ren's eyes, which now held not just shock but a deep, unspoken acknowledgement of what I had achieved. In that gaze was the silent admission that I was no longer the outsider, no longer the victim of dismissal and mockery. I was a true contender. Shifu Ren fought back fiercely, his desperation palpable as he unleashed a flurry of attacks more intense than ever before. His movements were aggressive, almost frantic, as if trying to erase the damage done to his pride and reclaim his position of dominance. I met his strikes with everything I had left, dodging, blocking, and countering with blows that carried the weight of my journey, the years of being underestimated, the nights spent doubting myself, the countless times I had been knocked down and forced to rise again. The battle became a brutal dance of endurance and spirit, a test not just of physical strength, but of mental fortitude. Minutes passed like hours as we pushed each other to the brink, sweat blurring my vision and every breath burning in my lungs. And then, with the last shred of energy coursing through my veins, I spotted a final opening, brief, almost imperceptible, and I struck with a force born of pure determination. My fist connected solidly with Shifu Ren's jaw, sending him sprawling back, teetering on the edge of collapse. For a moment, time froze. The crowd held its breath, the silence deafening. And then, as if the whole world exhaled in unison, the bell rang, signaling the end of the fight, the end of the battle that had defined us both. We stood there, battered and bruised, breathing heavily, our bodies trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. There was no bow, no formal gesture of respect, but in that suspended moment, we shared something far deeper, a recognition forged in the crucible of combat and struggle. It was the understanding that this fight had changed us, not only as opponents, but as individuals. That victory was not simply about who had dealt the final blow, but about the transformation that had taken place within both of us. As I stepped out of the ring that night, the weight of every insult, every doubt, every moment of invisibility lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked woman who had entered this fight hoping for mere survival. I was a warrior reborn. Scarred but unbroken, humbled yet unyielding, forever changed by the battle that had forced me to confront my deepest fears and emerge victorious, not only in body but in spirit. That night, I learned the most profound lesson of all. True strength is not measured by muscle or mastery alone, but by the courage to rise after every fall, to face the world with unshakable resolve, and to claim your place regardless of the obstacles stacked against you. My fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever lay ahead, because I had finally discovered the true meaning of power, the power to stand tall, to fight fiercely, and to never be silenced again.